about the moratorium.
Awesome. Thanks, Paul. Well, I'm really excited to be talking to all of you today. And I think the point of my presentation is to kind of give everyone an overview of what a moratorium is and how they've been impactful in the past, including in animal rights, or at least animal welfare, and why I am really excited about asking the governor of California for a moratorium and why I think this is a good move. And I hope that by the end of this, you are as excited as I am for making this ask to our elected officials and campaigning for a moratorium. So it wouldn't be a presentation by me if we didn't do a poll, because I love polls. So we're going to do a poll, and you should all see this now. Oh, you're clicking away there. Don't spoil my presentation, Paul. But you should see a poll here. I just want to know if people have heard of moratoriums. This is anonymous, so you're not going to be like called out for not knowing what it is or anything, but let's just take 15 seconds to see how many people have heard of a moratorium, and probably a lot of people have heard of them, but maybe don't exactly know what they are. So I'll just give folks maybe 15 more seconds to vote in this. I'm seeing the votes coming in, which is awesome. Sorry if you're a co-host, you can't see it. All right. Well, here we go. I'm going to share the results here. So quite a lot of people have heard of moratoriums. Quite a few people know what it is too, but some people are unfamiliar. So I'm going to ask for a volunteer, someone who voted that yes, they've heard of a moratorium and they know what one is, to let us know what a moratorium is, just in general. So I'm going to put a star in the chat if you want to volunteer to give your explanation of what a moratorium is. Any takers? All right, Lori, go for it. Why don't you tell us what a moratorium is?
So it's like a temporary pause on something that might already be legal. In California, we have a moratorium on the death penalty, for example, where it's technically legal, but we have stopped doing them. And that might have changed recently, but just as an example.
Yeah, that's totally right. It is a temporary prohibition of an activity. So if we were to have a moratorium on meetups, we would say, like, we're not banning meetups, but we're just not going to have any more meetups in the future. And you can have a moratorium that's kind of indefinite, like moratorium on meetups, we'll revisit it when we think we want to have meetups again. Or you could have a moratorium for like a certain amount of time, like we're going to have a moratorium on meetups for 1 year and then resume them after a year. Now, we're not actually going to have a moratorium on meetups, at least I hope not, because meetups are awesome, but that's just an example. And Lori already gave us an example, but I was wondering if anybody can write in the chat any other examples of moratoriums that exist now that you've heard of or that have existed in the past. So let's see, we already got one from Lori. Rent moratorium, that's good. Any other ideas of moratoriums that you've heard of before? Okay, factory farms, drilling for oil, evictions. Oh, Chicano moratorium, someone read my email. Testing on certain primates. Actually, I'm assuming that's true. I don't know of all the moratoriums, but I think that's accurate, certainly should exist. Vietnam War. Awesome. Yeah, those are a lot of examples. So if you can go to the next slide, Paul. I'm going to go through a couple of them just to give people some historical background on some moratoriums. But right now, a lot of talk, if you just Google moratorium, you're going to see a lot of moratoriums on evictions. And that's because of the COVID-19 pandemic. So when this hit and a lot of people lost their jobs and the economy was tanking, a lot of places passed a moratorium on evictions saying, like, we're not saying that people will never be evicted again, but right now we should not be kicking people out of their homes because they lost their jobs because of this global pandemic. And right now, actually, this is going through the California legislature again. It just passed the assembly like a couple days ago and is going to be voted on in the Senate, where they would extend this moratorium on evictions until 90 days until the end of the pandemic, essentially, so that people have some time to get on their feet, or like April 2021. So I don't even know right now like what the status of the statewide moratorium on evictions is, but I know that they are working to continue to have this to protect people during the pandemic. So next one, I think Veer said this, is offshore drilling. In the wake of the Deepwater oil spill, which was in 2010, which is this huge oil spill, I believe in the Gulf of Mexico, correct me if I'm wrong, the US government said that they needed to have a 6-month moratorium on drilling because they realized it was so unsafe. So I think this is a good precedent of something some catastrophe happening, and then the government realizing like this industry is really fraught and we need to figure out how to do this better. Now, I don't really want to argue for a good way to do offshore drilling, but they did have a moratorium in place for 6 months while they tried to figure out how to prevent future oil spills. And then Lori kind of stole my thunder, but the moratorium that I'm really excited about beyond animal agriculture is the moratorium on the death penalty. And why I think this is so fascinating is because of how it happened. So for many years, people have been trying to ban the death penalty in California. And it's gone to ballot measures and all of these things. And every single time it is so close. I think the last ballot measure, like 52% voted in support of the death penalty and 48% voted against it. So they basically, like, we're so close to banning it, but the state of California is really split on this. But when Gavin Newsom was elected as governor, he was like, I am morally opposed to the death penalty. And I believe the governor has to actually like sign off on executions. And he's like, I am not, as governor, going to sanction the death of someone else. And he acknowledged that the death penalty is extremely racist. And he just said, I'm not going to do it. I don't have the power to ban it. That would have to be a ballot measure, but on my watch, it's not going to happen. And he signed an executive order placing a moratorium on the death penalty in March of 2019, and even dismantled the death chamber in San Quentin prison because he knew that nobody was going to be executed. And I think this is just a really incredible precedent of a state being split. This was not an overwhelming majority. They couldn't ban it, and someone just said, this is morally wrong, and I'm going to use the powers that I have to prevent it from happening. And I spoke to Hadar Aviram, who many of, and by spoke to, I mean emailed her briefly, but who many of us know because she is an animal rights activist and law professor, but most of what she focuses on is criminal justice reform. And I asked her, what impact do you think the death penalty moratorium is going to have on abolishing the death penalty? And she said, I think this is a critical step because it is going to get people used to the idea that we can live in a world without the death penalty. And once people are just like over it and no one's been executed for a while, it's going to be a lot easier to ban it permanently. And she found it to be very impactful. So that gives me a lot of hope for moratoriums related to animals and animal agriculture. So if you want to go to the next slide, Paul, animal agriculture. And, you know, sometimes I think DXC is like on the forefront. We're the first people to do things, but we are not the first people to think about moratoriums on animal agriculture and animal feeding operations. And I think the moratorium that we're going to propose is a lot bolder than the other ones that have been proposed, but I want to give people some context that this is happening and it is not being led by animal rights activists for the most part. Just, you know, in Oregon right now, there is a group, Food and Water Action, and in coalition with other groups that are pushing for a moratorium on mega dairies, no more large farms getting passed. There's actually was a moratorium on large CAFOs in a county in South Dakota. There's a moratorium on farms in a place in Arkansas. Like, these are not progressive states, and they had these moratoriums. There was some in Wisconsin. There's actually a moratorium on the construction of new pig farms that have lagoon and spray systems in North Carolina because we see how terrible they are. So this isn't totally a new concept. And actually the American Public Health Association even has a position paper saying that we should enact a national moratorium on large CAFOs. Now, just for some definitions, a CAFO is a concentrated animal feeding operation, and there's like various levels of them that they define by size. And a lot of these moratoriums are specifically for large CAFOs. As animal rights people, we don't think that it's okay to exploit animals in smaller farms. So our ask is going to be for all animal feeding operations. But I think the concept of this is out there. And would you believe it or not, in rural Utah, Millard County, Utah, is a place that's really close to where Circle 4 Farm is, and they saw how terrible those farms are, and the residents said, we don't even want a moratorium on pig farms in our county. We want a straight up ban. And so in November, on their ballot in Millard County, Utah, they are going to have a vote on whether they should ban large pig farms from opening in their county. And in the meantime, they passed a moratorium. So I thought this was really great because this is an example of a moratorium basically leading to a ban, which is what we want. We don't want a moratorium forever. We want a ban. So it's like they realize they need to ban it. And in the meantime, let's at least not make the problem worse by having a moratorium. And then lastly, Cory Booker and Elizabeth Warren, I know probably people have heard of this bill, the Farm System Reform Act, that they proposed, which is a national bill. And I think most people think it's not going to pass. It's quite ambitious for the federal government. But one part of it is that they want an immediate moratorium nationally on building new large CAFOs. Again, large CAFOs only, but these are mainstream politicians. Like, they are not radical animal rights activists, and they're calling for it. So I think this sets us up pretty well. So what DXC is asking for is a ban on the construction of AFOs. So that's kind of this very technical term, but for what we can consider is like any sort of industrialized factory farm situation. So wouldn't ban someone from having chickens in their backyard, which I know is also exploitative, but probably not under the same regulations as these animal feeding operations. So a ban on building new AFOs and slaughterhouses, and a ban on the expansion of new ones. So I'm obviously really excited about this because I know I'm talking very fast, but I want to go over like 5 reasons why I think this is a really good ask. So if you want to go to the next slide, Paul, the first reason why I think this is a really good ask is that it will directly impact animals. So I know it's exciting. Go to the grocery store, there's new vegan products. It's very great. You can get vegan pizza. It's exciting. But the reality is that a lot of like the numbers of animals that are being exploited and killed are going up every year. And that's because slaughterhouses are getting bigger and they're building new farms. And we've actually seen this in California. Yosemite Foods was a smaller slaughterhouse, and they expanded and built a new facility in 2020 in California. They built a new slaughterhouse to kill more pigs in 2020 in California. And to make it worse, the California government actually gave them $2 million to do it. And we've been following the Sonoma County situation very closely, which is this county that we've investigated probably more than any other county in California for having all of these farms and exploiting animals. And if you follow what they're talking about over there, they want to build a new slaughterhouse in Sonoma County, which is clearly not okay. We should not be making this problem worse and essentially like digging ourselves deeper and deeper into this hole. So if we can prevent any new farms and slaughterhouses from opening up, I think we can actually prevent future generations from animals being killed, of animals being killed. Now, of course, California, it's only one state, but it's the #1 ag state in the entire country, and it's also the 5th largest economy in the world. So what we do here will have a big impact. And I think also we've seen in COVID times that slaughterhouses, there's actually an article in the New York Times that says like slaughterhouses are the weakest link in this entire web of animal agriculture. Like, you saw what happened when the slaughterhouses shut down because of COVID. It was mass chaos. And so I think if we can prevent the expansion of any more slaughterhouses, we can really make a dent on the ability of the industry like symbolic statements signal to the population like what the general consensus is. So when the government says we're in a climate emergency, even if they haven't done anything yet, I think that's actually important because it tells people like, whoa, something's really wrong and we should actually direct attention and resources to this. And so when the government says we should not be building any more of these facilities, it signals to the population that something is very wrong with these facilities. And we need to take a little time out, as Paul said, and decide what to do about it. But it is a really strong symbolic statement that this is bad, in the same way that when they said we shouldn't do offshore drilling anymore because we just had this terrible spill, we need to figure out how to do this, it signaled that that was a bad industry. And the reason I also really like this ask is because it's not a welfarist ask. We're not asking to reform the system or make the deaths a little better. Like, it is a stop to this entire system. And I think we're setting ourselves up very well. I don't know what the grammar is. We're setting ourselves up to ban this entire system by kind of saying like all of it needs to stop instead of just reforming it. So third reason why I think it's great is it's immediate. I know how frustrating it can be to kind of say like, yay, we banned fur in California, and it doesn't go into effect until 2023, or San Francisco's divesting by 2024. And that's just how legislation works. But a moratorium is like right now. Like Gavin Newsom passed that moratorium on the death penalty. No one was executed after that, and they took away the death chamber. And I think we can signal, like, you know, I use this photo to demonstrate urgency because it shows like this is a disaster that we're in right now. Animals are dying, the planet is on fire. We need something to happen right now. And so this is like an immediate action that the governor and the state can take. Fourth reason is I think that a moratorium gives us a lot of opportunities for coalition building. I know it's frustrating that sometimes it's hard to get people on board with the idea that maybe we shouldn't be killing and eating and exploiting animals at all. And I think we'll get there. We will get the rest of the social justice movements on our side too. But right now, I think everyone is at least converging around the idea that like something is very wrong with this industry. And we've seen it even highlighted more during COVID, where people are having to go to work in these slaughterhouses. They're getting sick. They have no protections. They're dying. We have wildfires. You know, zoonotic diseases are coming from these areas. And I think this is a great ask that a lot of people can get behind. And when we have reached out, and Kitty and Priya and a lot of other people are doing amazing work reaching out to other groups to sign on to this letter, and we've got anti-racist, environmental, public health organizations, all of these groups supporting the idea of a moratorium. So I feel excited about the opportunity to build coalitions around this ask. And the last reason why I think a moratorium is a good ask right now is just because like the time, like it's a good time. I mean, it's a terrible time, which makes it a good time, because animal agriculture is just contributing to so many of these disasters that we're witnessing right now in our world. The pandemic came from, you know, non-human animal transmission, not a factory farm in the US, but it could have, and other pandemics have. And we're basically going to these farms and testing and finding viruses in these facilities. The world is shocked by what is happening to the meat industry during the pandemic. Like ventilation shutdown was something that everybody was against. We're seeing the wildfires in California, and it's very linked to climate change. Again, there was an article really saying like, this is why these lightning strikes, I think, are made worse by climate change. And so I think this is just like the perfect time to do it, not to mention having people like Booker and Warren talking about this idea makes it seem like maybe our ask isn't that radical after all. And of course, like I said, our ask is more than what they're asking for. It's not just on large CAFOs, but I mean, we shouldn't be like making the same ask as the mainstream politicians. So I just think right now is a really good time to make this ask. So how are we going to do it? I think we're going to do it the way we do everything, which is by building a mass movement of people who are going to take action. And you can go to the next slide. And I think Paul already talked about this, but we wrote this open letter. We wrote a policy memo. That's the first step. It's being polite. Michael and Victoria wrote the policy memo, and Cassie wrote the open letter explaining, you know, in a little bit more scientific terms of what all the things I just said. And we emailed it to Gavin Newsom, and we delivered it, and we're going to continue to deliver it. And I think we will escalate when or if he doesn't respond. And to be honest, I don't know how realistic it is. Like, I don't know what the response is going to be to whether or not this is something we can pass in the short term. I mean, I think eventually it's definitely going to happen. We're not going to have factory farms at all. But without having a couple meetings with legislators yet, and without doing public polling, which we probably will be doing soon. Eva's working hard on getting some public polling for Californians so that we have some data to back us up when we say that I think the majority of people will support this. It's hard to know, but I think it's worth a try, and I feel really excited about this. And I know that maybe it seems like emailing the governor doesn't have that big of an impact, but it's also, I think, important for us to like set us up for some of the bolder actions that we're doing. When we've delivered him a letter many times and we've had hundreds of people email him, we are justified in escalating our actions. So if people are a little confused as to why maybe we're making legislative asks of the governor, the reason is that I think this could pass in 2 ways. One, it could pass the way the fur ban did, like all these votes in the Assembly and the Senate and all that stuff. California state legislator is pretty bought by the Farm Bureau, so it's going to be very difficult to make that happen. The other way it could happen is kind of like the death penalty, where the governor, we can get the governor's moral conscience and he can just say that this is the right thing to do and he can pass an executive order. Both of those are going to be very difficult, but we can try both ways. I know Compassionate Bay is reaching out to assembly members and senators, and we're also reaching out to the governor, and we'll just take whatever we can get in how we can get this passed. So what I would love for people to do right now is, if you haven't already, go to this link. I can post it in the chat, and we are going to write to the governor together. And if you have already done it, you can start thinking of some questions that you have about moratorium stuff. But go to this link, I put it in the chat, and you're going to click Have Comment, and then just fill in your name and email and select animal issues and concerns from the list. And when you get to the part where you can fill in your comment, you can write your own,